All right, so hello everyone. I'm Nick Brandt, and I'm coming to you today as a designer working on the foundations team. Typically, I'm within global search, but for now, I'm helping out with this team just while Austin's out on parental leave. So today, I just want to talk to you a bit about some of the work we've been doing for the navigation redesign and where we're going to be heading with that. I primarily wanted to go over this just because I know there's been communication within like the UX channel regarding this work, but I wanted to be able to review this with you all for those of you who haven't been able to either take a look at that as well as just to go into a bit more detail from the design side. So first off, I just wanted to briefly review the latest research round that we had just conducted. And this was essentially refining the previous round down to two different concepts that we were testing with users. And that round previously was conducted by Austin, Anna, as well as Ashley from the UXR side. And for this research, it was a mix of both mature and new GitLab users, because we wanted to not only test this with users who are familiar with GitLab and may have like a bias towards how it currently is, but also those that are more new and who haven't used GitLab quite as much. In addition, we also wanted to test this with a variety of different personas. And so we did this with software developers, product managers, security analysts, as well as ops professionals, just to get a little wider spectrum from the persona standpoint. I provided links to both the slide deck of the insights that came out of this research, as well as the research issue itself. So you can take a look at that where you can find additional details. But just high level on this, users were presented with both of these two different concepts within each session. We rotated the order based off of different sessions, and they were essentially asked to go through a series of tasks for each one, along with rating those tasks along each step. At the end of each concept, they would also rate their experience with that concept and provide some feedback specific to each concept, as well as at the very end, they actually were asked to essentially provide which concept they preferred out of the two. I'll note some of the major differences between these two concepts, one being over here on Element Swizzle, we maintained a top nav bar versus here on the right on the super sidebar concept, we essentially are consolidating everything over into a sidebar. Some of the other distinctions are on the super sidebar concept, we went with what we're calling a context switcher, which was a different way to change your context, such as projects and groups today. Which I'll go into a bit more detail in a later slide. Versus on the Element Swizzle, changing context was a bit more different than today, where you would actually have to go back to a root or the home page in order to change your project or group. Some of the other smaller changes are on the super sidebar, we've removed the expose search field and went to more of just a button interaction where that would bring up in modal. As well as there's an addition of what we're calling a your work section on the super sidebar concept, which I'll also go into a bit more detail here in a bit. So basically from a high level of the results of these sessions, the super sidebar concept performed quite a bit better. So as it relates to preference, 81% of users actually preferred this concept over the other. When it comes down to task completion, I will say it was closer, but there was still definitely better task completion on the super sidebar concept in comparison to the Element Swizzle concept. And this was mainly evident in things like the navigation between contexts, such as groups and projects, where users actually often struggled with this on the Element Swizzle concept versus pretty much everyone got it here on the super sidebar concept. The other main difference was the super sidebar concept supported both mature and new GitLab users in their common workflows versus the Element Swizzle concept users often struggled, I should say new users often struggle with some of these tasks in comparison with mature users who actually perform just as well as Super Sidebar. Some other things to point out that I essentially pulled out of the research was, users often mentioned how it was, less overwhelming and easier to orient for this concept. They preferred the clear distinction between the main navigation area and the main content, and having, in this concept, we have essentially a very bold sidebar compared to the content area. So that attributed to that, but also just the fact that there wasn't multiple locations that they were having to go to for navigation. And then finally, it was just perceived as a more clean, modern look, similar to other products that participants had used. Some of the things mentioned were like Gmail or Slack and how it was familiar experience to these other products. Oops. So that said, there were parts of Element Swizzle that participants did appreciate, and those being one of them, the icons for the navigational groupings. So one of the things that was part of both of these concepts is we actually consolidated some of our current nav items into navigational groupings. And one of the differences between the two concepts is the Element Swizzle had icons for the groupings versus the Super Sidebar had icons for each individual page, but you wouldn't see the individual pages obviously until you opened up some of those groupings. And users often found that it was easier to quickly identify where something might live based off of having that quick association with an icon for the groupings, and so that was preferred. Another item that users preferred in this concept was some of the informative tooltips that we didn't have in the Super Sidebar concept. And that is an example of that is below here, where you see the issues item, and next to it, when you're hovering over, we show, you have one assigned issue or whatever that may be for that particular user. So it was, a more personalized experience in that case, and also users preferred having these tooltips to help them also identify different navigation items or groupings as to what they might contain. And then lastly, there was definitely mixed feedback regarding color usage between the two concepts. Some users really liked the bold contrast on Super Sidebar, where we had, that very bold indigo color on the left, separating it from the main content area, versus some users really didn't like that and preferred a much lighter appearance, such as in this Element Swizzle concept. So a bit of mixed feedback on that, but I would say it's probably expected. And the reason why we have multiple themes today is that color is very much opinionated across users. So based off of the research, we've essentially indicated that we will be moving forward with the Super Sidebar concept. And so one of the first tasks for us to do was start breaking that down. We are definitely going to be taking, like I said, the elements from the Element Swizzle concept into the design for the Super Sidebar. But all in all, we're going to be moving forward with the Super Sidebar concept as a whole. So one of the things that I worked to do was to break down some of those major changes for this concept into an epic that we've created, and start to, both kind of weigh the effort behind some of those changes, as well as start to dig in and really flesh out some of the details about those specific changes. So I think the easiest way for me to go through these is to actually show you them within the prototype. So that's how I'm going to go through this. So the first item on there was persistent sidebar. And so the notion here is that, if we're going to be moving towards a navigation where we're consolidating everything into a left sidebar, that means that we're going to need to make sure that that sidebar is almost always there. Or for very, specific instances, maybe it's not, like the sign-in page, we wouldn't require it, for example. So there's a lot of pages today in GitLab that currently don't have a sidebar. Some examples would be like your issues page today, or your MRs page, to-dos, and etc. So we had to think about how we would provide this sidebar on those pages. That said, along with the super sidebar concept, we also were testing that area which I was referring to as your work. And so this was an idea of essentially creating an area in our product where we are essentially combining all of the things that are associated to you. So this is including things such as your projects, your groups, the issues, MRs, and to-dos that I just mentioned, as well as some of these other items that we currently have within our main menu today, such as exploring milestones, snippets, activity, as well as these dashboard items that are very much personalized based off of a user. And so it seemed to make sense to really have all these combined into one location that a user could navigate between, such as like when I'm viewing issues, it makes it really easy to just go and view my merge request at the same time. Or if I need to get to one of my projects, I can easily get to that from there as well. So that essentially helps to resolve this question of, how do we handle, the sidebar for some of these pages that don't have one today. That said, there's still quite a bit of other instances where we don't have a sidebar today that we also had to think about. And one of those that I'm most notably tied to would be the global search page. So today we have a left rail within the page, which I guess show you real quick. Currently, it's only when a specific scope has a filter, such as the status and confidentiality for issues. However, we currently have an MR that I think was just recently merged around making these items actually left navigation items instead. And so there would actually be this left rail on every single scope here. So the easiest way to make this transition for search really was seen as just moving those current filters and facets over here to the left sidebar, which as seen here. So we're using this main content area for just the results at that point, and then all the filtering and facets will happen over here in this global left sidebar. Another instance that I'll point out that we don't really have a sidebar today would be like user pages. So today we have essentially a variety of tabs underneath the contributions graph today, which a user can essentially navigate through. And those made a lot of sense to just be navigation items moving in this direction. And so the user could simply, change those views based off of having these navigation items over here on the left-hand side. Other areas that I'll mention is things like help, where we don't currently have a sidebar, though we have a lot of other pages that are associated to help, and within that same section, it also made sense to just include those here within that area. But there's still pages that, perhaps haven't been defined yet and how we're going to handle this, or things that we currently haven't simply gotten to yet in terms of the design for how we're going to handle needing a sidebar. But that's where we're going to be working with different groups that may have this need, and to ensure that we have, a good solution for those areas. So that is the first item here for the persistent sidebar. The next one that I wanted to go over is the context switcher. So I've already essentially kind of shown this a bit already, but the notion of the context switcher is this area that currently on like projects and groups where it previously was just an avatar and the name of the project or group, which would take you to the overview page, is now being transitioned into a dropdown. And in this case, it's more of like a takeover of the left sidebar than a specific like dropdown element. So clicking into this, we provide options to things such as that your work section I talked about. If you're an admin, you would have your admin link that is currently present in our main menu today. As well as we're showing recent projects and recent groups. This is similar to what you would find today within like this projects and groups section here. You can also get to all your projects and all your groups by those links as well. And we're also considering having a search field within this area. So it'd be similar to the experience here where you can search within projects and groups as well. Initially, we were looking to really push users more towards using global search for that in the future. And search was actually much more tied to this context switcher in the past in some of the previous designs, such as in the research. However, we've deviated a bit from that with the more recent designs, and that's why it's being considered to actually add this search functionality back into this context switcher. Just because if you're in, if you're opening up this switcher to find a recent project or group and you don't see it, it's easier to just be able to search from that moment rather than going and opening the search and doing it that way. Let's see what else with the context switcher. Okay, so this does provide one, additional change here. Since this is no longer a navigational item that can take you to your overview page, we're essentially having to make that a new item here within the left sidebar. So the project overview here link would take you to that page that we're now no longer able to get to by clicking on this element. The next item on here that I'll go over is the navigational groupings. So, as seen below here, and I mentioned earlier in the process, we were working to consolidate some of our current navigation into some logical groupings that we could use for users. And really the notion of this is to just help simplify the experience, but also we're still trying to leverage a lot of the existing submenus that we have today that users are familiar with. There are some items that do warrant always being exposed, such as issues and merge requests that are very commonly navigated to. And in earlier concepts, we had essentially all navigation items underneath the grouping, and that was somewhat of a major hiccup for users, is finding issues and merge requests and feeling it should be always present. And so that is one of the changes that we've made with that feedback. Another thing this does resolve is within the current navigation. If I were to go to a project, we currently have a mix of groupings as well as nav items within this listing today, such as merge request is actually just one navigation item versus CI/CD, you have multiple items underneath here, and clicking just goes to the first item. It's a bit more apparent here in the collapse state, as we've even had issues come up where a user will think that this tooltip is actually similar to these drop-down elements, where they can actually go and click on that item where it's actually just a tooltip. So as seen here, there's an intermingle of groupings as well as nav items, whereas in this new design, we'd essentially be having all the groupings in one area, and then the nav items that are more singular pages up above.
Time check, Nick, just a couple minutes left.
Okay. So one other thing that I wanted to point out with this is we are going to be doing some additional research on this navigation groupings, just because we did make a lot of assumptions in some of the naming and groupings themselves, what went under those, and we're going to be fleshing out those ideas along with some of the interactions in some upcoming research that we have scheduled for this milestone. Very much tied to this is the favorites or pin section. And so, with hiding a lot of these navigation items underneath these groupings, we wanted to provide the ability for users to, elevate ones that they're commonly using in their day-to-day work. And so the notion here would be that, for each of these items, you can actually favorite them or pin them. Naming is kind of up in the air right now in terms of what we call that. But then they would show up here within your favorite section, and then you could reorder those, based on your preference. So this provides a bit more of a personalized experience without having to fully make our, left navigation, fully customized. Let's see here. This one as well, we're doing some additional research on before we move forward with it, just because we want to make sure we have some of these details a bit more fleshed out and some of the assumptions around this and things like terminology a bit more validated. But that would be done essentially after the groupings research. And then the last item on here was the search, which I've shown a bit as well. And so this is moving towards more of a command palette-like experience, which is actually something that the global search team was really wanting to do anyways in the future. And so this is just moving in that direction now to provide that capability in the future. So, our first iteration of this might just be taking the current search that we have today and putting it within this modal. But then in the future, this can start to actually act more like a command palette where you can do things like navigate, you can perform some actions or commands, as well as you can just search from this experience as well, all in one place. I've included a link here to like an iterative approach to this design within this Figma file below, so you can check that out as well as there's an epic link here that goes down to the epic that contains all of these items as well. Just briefly, this is the current design. I've included the link to the prototype so you all can view it, outside of this session. As you probably have seen, we're moving forward with more of a light theme initially, as this is more similar to like our default theme today. With the second theme that we would be focusing on would be for dark mode, as it is our second most popular theme today. And there are a lot of users that prefer, features such as the IDE in that mode, and we want to make sure we're accommodating for that in the future. I don't think I'm going to have time to go through the rollout plan for this. There is an issue link that you can view regarding this. But yeah, otherwise, I'm definitely open to, I can create essentially another video in Loom that I can go over some of this as well, which might be helpful. And I can share that out as well. And yeah, that was it. I'm sure you all have a variety of different questions regarding this. Feel free to direct all of those to Tori. Her Slack handle is, no, I'm just kidding. Feel free to reach out to me in Slack or in the nav and settings channel. Happy to also have coffee chats with anyone who would like to do that. But yeah, happy to go over this in more detail, as well as, like I said, I can provide another Loom video with some more details on some of this as well.